We can never really know the past, but we can imagine. The signs are everywhere, fragments and symbols, memories and tokens which can point our imaginations in the right direction. The rocks of Sydney have developed a unique sense of place over the last 200 years. Only a short distance from the waterfront, the historical shopping area is a happy marriage of the old and the new. The keen explorer can see the signs of a crowded past, and by watching and listening can still hear the faint echoes of more turbulent times. Lanes and streets that were carved out of the sandstone ridges were of necessity narrow, with houses built close together. Their backyards were small, with outside privies. Closer to the waterfront were the large warehouses and import and export buildings that stored the wool and the wheat that was sent to Britain as the colony established its economy. There were rich people living at the Rocks, but not many. The locals were generally working class, packers, carters, coal lumpers, and there were pubs and prostitutes and larrikins. There were boarding houses and Chinese laundries. In 1900, the government bought the Rocks lock, stock and barrel. Some said it was necessary because of the bubonic plague, but there were deeper reasons. The Rocks area was to be modernised. A harbour bridge and expressways were to be built. Hundreds of buildings were demolished. Streets disappeared. The Argyle Stairs walkway, up and over one of the sandstone ridges, still provide access to a more relaxed area of Sydney. Millers Point has some of the very early buildings of the city. The Observatory Hill of solid sandstone was one of the first quarries, and because of the elevation, the first signal station and observatory was built here. The buildings have been preserved as a museum, and here also is the National Trust Centre, housed in a former school. The developers have been busy too, as the Cahill Expressway was cut through the solid rock to ease congestion on the Bridge motorway. The Garrison Church, whose official title is the Church of the Holy Trinity, was commenced in 1850 and enlarged between 1855 and 1874. The beautiful stained glass windows were crafted in England and gifted by a Dr. James Mitchell. The interior is lined by regimental flags, and plaques on the walls dedicated to the men of various British and Australian Army units can be read by following their memorial ambulatory around the side aisles. Argyle Green is a peaceful place with its restored terrace houses. The cast iron railings and house trimmings adding to the charm. The residents here have a high standard of house maintenance. The skyscrapers and the high-rise buildings of the city seem to crowd closer and closer to the waterfront, and in 1960 a plan was mooted to demolish the remaining Rocks buildings and erect a more modern housing and business area. At this, the locals cried enough, and the Sydney Cove Redevelopment Authority was forced to listen to the arguments against demolition and acknowledge the importance of keeping an historical record of the past. Former warehouses and bond stores were taken over and rebuilt to preserve their character as much as possible, then rented or leased to businesses for shops and restaurants to cater for the increasing tourist trade. The pubs of the Rocks have always been important to the locals as meeting places, as well as accommodation for single men, especially labourers. Sadly, most have been demolished or destroyed by fire, but there are still some, preserved as much as possible as they were in the heyday of their past. Developers were allowed to put up some high-rise hotels, but had to conform to regulations, and where buildings had a protection order had to rebuild to the original specifications. The schoolmaster's house is on the original site and has the original colour scheme, but is now a restaurant. The hotel on the waterfront is curved to follow the line of Campbell's Cove and matches in well with the redevelopment plans of the authority. Cadman's Cottage, once abandoned and derelict, has been restored and is the information centre for the New South Wales Parks and Wildlife Service, a feature now of the waterfront park. There has been a measure of infilling in the harbour, mainly to provide a deep water berth for the many cruise ships that visit Sydney. The commercialisation of the Rocks area has not detracted from its charm, as is evidenced by the number of visitors that explore the narrow alleyways and patronise the coffee shops, the restaurants and various boutiques that stock all manner of crafts and designer clothing. If shopping palls, there are the historic walks, some guided, others well signposted, where the keen explorer can wander at will. The whole area has been crisscrossed with roads and expressways in the name of modernisation until many of the original ways have been lost. But since the 1970s, a more enlightened view of the past has taken over. Old stores and warehouses have become museums and art galleries, and the Argyle warehouse is now a very modern department store with still much of the original timbers on view. Where rebuilding is necessary for safety reasons, regulations state that new work must match the original structure. The streets in the old Rocks are still paved with cobblestones and old bricks, once brought out as ballast in the early ships. And everywhere there are steps, some very worn, where the feet of the first settlers trod. Oh yes. The echoes of the past are still audible to those whose ears are ready to hear.